The tale begins when Captain Arthur Hastings, freshly returned from the events at Styles Court, once again finds himself drawn into the orbit of Hercule Poirot. Hastings, restless after his wartime service, travels to France with Poirot after receiving a curious letter from a wealthy man named Paul Renauld. In his letter, Renauld writes in desperate, urgent tones. He fears his life is in danger and begs Poirot to come at once to his estate, the Villa Geneviève, in the seaside town of Merlinville-sur-Mer. Poirot, always intrigued by pleas for help, agrees to go at once, taking Hastings along with him. Hastings, romantic and eager as ever, looks forward not only to a new case but to the adventure of traveling with his friend. They cross the channel by boat and arrive in France, but by the time they reach Merlinville, it is too late. The villa stands grand and imposing, but its atmosphere is heavy with dread. On their arrival, Poirot and Hastings are met with shocking news. Paul Renauld has been murdered. The household is in chaos, servants whispering in corners, and the police already at work on the scene. Inspector Giraud, a brash and self-confident officer of the French Sûreté, has taken charge. He greets Poirot with thinly veiled disdain, unimpressed by the little Belgian's reputation. Poirot and Hastings learn the terrible details. Paul Renauld was found dead that very morning in a shallow grave dug near a newly laid golf course just beyond his garden. He had been stabbed in the back with a knife, his body oddly twisted, his coat buttoned up wrong, and his hands bound. The position of the body and the way it was covered with earth suggests a hurried attempt at concealment. His wife, Eloise Renauld, had raised the alarm, claiming her husband was taken from their bedroom during the night by two masked intruders. They tied her up, threatened her, and forced Renauld to go with them. Hours later, his body was discovered. Poirot immediately senses something unusual in the scene. He notes the precise condition of the grave, the arrangement of Renauld's clothing, and the contradictions in his wife's story. Inspector Giraud, however, is confident in his own deductions. To him, the case is straightforward. He believes it to be the work of a gang of South American ruffians, connected to the mysterious name Cochero, which surfaces in Renauld's background. Poirot, unimpressed, keeps his thoughts to himself but begins his quiet observations. At the villa, Poirot and Hastings meet the household members. Madame Eloise Renauld, the widow, is distraught, her manner dramatic but tinged with something Poirot finds slightly artificial. Then there is Jacques Renauld, Paul's grown son, who has just returned from Paris. Jack is pale and shaken, his relationship with his father apparently strained. The servants whisper about quarrels between father and son, particularly over Jack's romantic entanglements. Poirot learns that Jack was recently in love with Marthe Daubreau, the daughter of a neighbor who lives in a villa nearby. Madame Daubreau is an elegant but calculating woman, and Marthe is beautiful, alluring, and ambitious. Paul Renauld had forbidden the match, wishing his son to marry someone of higher station. This creates immediate tension. Could Jack have defied his father? Could Marthe or her mother be involved? Poirot takes careful note. During their inquiries, Hastings himself finds a new distraction. On the train to Merlinville, he had encountered a young Englishwoman traveling alone. She was lively, charming, and spirited, though Hastings never caught her real name. He thinks of her constantly, nicknaming her Cinderella in his mind because of her elusive and fairy tale quality. To his astonishment, she appears again in Merlinville, crossing paths with him in the most unexpected ways. Hastings, ever the romantic, finds himself deeply drawn to her mysterious presence even as the investigation deepens. Poirot continues to study the crime scene. He pays particular attention to the shallow grave and the golf course where Renauld's body was found. Something about the position of the corpse troubles him, the coat buttoned the wrong way, the hands bound after death, and a curious fragment of paper found nearby. He also notices fresh tire tracks and footprints, clues that suggest more movement around the villa than Madame Renauld's story admits. The background of Paul Renauld proves intriguing. Once a wealthy Canadian, he had made his fortune in South America under mysterious circumstances. Rumors link him to shady business dealings, and perhaps even to an old crime. Poirot learns of a woman named Madame Baroldi, who was murdered years earlier, and a man named Georges Canot, accused of the crime but never found. Renaud's past, Poirot suspects, is not as clean as it seemed. As suspicion swirls, tempers rise. Jacques Renauld quarrels openly with his mother, who disapproves of his attachment to Marthe d'Aubroy. Marthe, meanwhile, declares her devotion to Jacques, but also shows signs of ambition, speaking of wealth and opportunity. Poirot observes her closely, noting how cleverly she speaks, how quickly she calculates. Madame d'Aubroy, her mother, is poised and controlled, but Poirot sees through her charm. Inspector Giraud, growing impatient with Poirot's quiet ways, mocks him openly. Giraud relies on energetic searches, magnifying glasses, and footprints, while Poirot insists the true solution lies not in the ground, but in the mind. Hastings bristles at Giraud's arrogance, but Poirot merely smiles, biding his time. The case takes a darker turn when another body is discovered. In a shed near the villa, the body of a woman is found, stabbed and hastily concealed. Her identity at first is unknown, but clues suggest she may be connected to Renaud's mysterious past. Some whisper that she is Georges Cano's old accomplice, or perhaps his victim returned to haunt him. Poirot insists this second death is the key to understanding the first. Meanwhile, Hastings's Cinderella continues to weave in and out of the story. She appears briefly, always vanishing before Hastings can press her for answers. Her knowledge of the case seems greater than she admits, and Poirot watches Hastings's growing infatuation with amused tolerance. "Mon ami," he teases, "your heart will lead you into trouble before your head can stop you." As Poirot gathers his evidence, he begins to form a daring theory. He examines the timeline carefully: the supposed abduction during the night, the widow's testimony, the son's movements, the neighbor's involvement. He realizes that the story Eloise Renauld told is riddled with contradictions. Why was she tied up in such a way that she could have easily freed herself? Why was Paul Renaud's body placed in such an artificial position? Why did he send such an urgent letter to Poirot only to be killed almost immediately afterward? The pieces begin to align in Poirot's mind, though Hastings remains bewildered. Poirot confides that the case is one of dual identities, of men and women not being who they seem, and of a crime rooted not only in greed but in passion and betrayal. Hastings, eager and impatient, begs for more, but Poirot insists the little gray cells must be given time to arrange the truth. The tension in the villa grows unbearable. Jacques Renauld is arrested by Inspector Giraud, accused of murdering his own father in a fit of rage. The evidence seems damning: his quarrels with Paul, his devotion to Marthe, his lies about his movements. Madame d'Aubroy, for her part, protests his innocence, but her smooth assurances only deepen Poirot's suspicion. Hastings is horrified by Jacques' arrest and insists to Poirot that the young man is innocent. Poirot, calm as ever, simply replies, "Patience, mon ami, the truth will reveal itself." And so, with Jacques imprisoned, suspicion high, and secrets still untold, Poirot prepares to make his final moves. The stage is set for a revelation that will shake the foundations of the Renauld household and expose the lies that hide beneath the surface of Merlinville. The arrest of Jacques Renauld throws the household into turmoil. Madame Renauld collapses in grief, declaring her son could never have harmed his father. Jacques himself, though shaken, maintains his innocence. He admits he quarreled with Paul over Marthe d'Aubroy, but swears he had nothing to do with the murder. Yet Inspector Giraud seems delighted with his own success, strutting about with an air of triumph. To him, the case is solved. But Poirot is far from convinced. He warns Hastings that the truth is still hidden, that Jacques' arrest is premature, and that Giraud has fallen victim to the oldest trap of all, the solution that appears too easy. Poirot begins to investigate on his own, carefully avoiding Giraud's interference. The second body, that of the woman found in the shed, becomes the focal point. She is eventually identified as Marthe d'Aubroy's maid, but Poirot believes this explanation is far too simple. He examines the woman's clothing, her features, and a curious scar on her face. These details remind him of an older case, the Baroldi affair in Paris, where a woman was stabbed and a man named Georges Cano vanished without a trace. Poirot begins to suspect that the woman in the shed is linked to that case, perhaps even the missing accomplice, Madame d'Aubroy herself. Hastings is baffled, but Poirot explains patiently. Paul Renaud's past in South America is murkier than anyone admits. He may have been Georges Quinault, or he may have known him closely. If Renauld was in truth Quinault, then his entire fortune and life in France rest on a lie. The arrival of a woman from his past could have threatened to expose him, but who, then, killed whom and why? Meanwhile, Hastings's Cinderella makes another sudden appearance. One evening, wandering near the golf course, Hastings encounters her once more. She warns him cryptically to be careful, that danger surrounds the Renauld case, and that not all is as it seems. When Hastings presses her for answers, she laughs and vanishes into the night, leaving him more enchanted and confused than ever. Poirot teases Hastings gently, but also admits that Cinderella seems to know more than she should. Poirot now turns his attention back to Madame d'Aubroy and her daughter Marthe. Their villa, situated conveniently close to the Renaulds, is a nest of secrets. Madame d'Aubroy is calm, dignified, but Poirot notices the faint tremor in her hands, the nervous glances she shares with Marthe. Marthe, though affectionate toward Jack, speaks often of wealth and position, and Poirot detects the cold ambition beneath her charm. Hastings, blinded by her beauty, insists she is sincere, but Poirot remains skeptical. One night, Poirot takes Hastings to the grave where Renaud's body was found. He demonstrates a peculiar point. The length of the grave was too short for Renaud's tall frame, forcing the murderer to bend the knees awkwardly when burying him. This, Poirot explains, is not the mark of a professional, it is the mark of haste, of someone unfamiliar with such work. Hastings is puzzled. But who would dig a grave too short for the body? Poirot only smiles. That, mon ami, is the very question. Inspector Giraud grows increasingly irritated with Poirot's quiet investigations. The two men clash openly, Giraud ridiculing Poirot's old-fashioned methods, and Poirot mocking Giraud's obsession with footprints and cigarette ends. To settle matters, Giraud proposes a wager. If Poirot cannot solve the case before him, he will admit defeat. Poirot accepts calmly, his eyes twinkling. Poirot's inquiries soon uncover a startling development. The dead woman in the shed is finally identified beyond doubt, not as a maid, but as Marthe d'Aubroy's mother. Madame d'Aubroy, the elegant lady in the villa, is in fact the notorious Madame Beroldy from the old Paris case. Years ago, she was accused of conspiring with her lover Georges Quinault to murder her husband, but Quinault vanished, and she was acquitted. Since then, she had lived under a false name, raising her daughter Marthe in secrecy. Now, it appears, Paul Renauld had recognized her and feared exposure. The implications are explosive. If Paul Renauld was indeed Georges Quinault himself, then he and Madame d'Aubroy once shared a guilty past. Did they clash again after years of silence? Did one betray the other? Poirot begins to see the outlines of a terrible story. A tale of blackmail, passion, and betrayal stretching back decades. Jack Renauld remains in prison, his prospects grim. Hastings visits him, offering encouragement, but Jack is despondent. He admits his love for Marthe has clouded his judgment, that he concealed things to protect her. Hastings, still half in love with Cinderella, finds himself torn between sympathy for Jack and suspicion of Marthe. Poirot, meanwhile, reassures Hastings that Jack will not hang because the true culprit is still at large. The turning point comes when Poirot receives a mysterious package, a set of letters written years ago by Georges Quinault, confessing his love for Madame Beroldy. The handwriting, the dates, the details, all point to one inescapable conclusion. Paul Renauld was Georges Quinault. He had remade himself in Canada, acquired wealth, and begun a new life in France. But his past caught up with him when Madame d'Aubroy reappeared. Poirot now understands. Renauld's death was not a simple robbery gone wrong. It was the final act in a drama that had begun long ago, a reckoning between two guilty lovers who had once conspired to kill. But the precise sequence, the roles of Eloise Renauld, Jack, Marthe, and Madame d'Aubroy, remains to be proven. The suspense tightens when Hastings' Cinderella is discovered near the villa, injured and unconscious after some mysterious incident. Hastings is frantic with worry, tending to her as best he can. Poirot, though sympathetic, uses the opportunity to ask her, questions once she recovers. She admits she knows more than she has told, that she has been watching the case closely for reasons of her own. But before she can reveal everything, she vanishes once more, leaving Hastings heartsick. Poirot now gathers the household for a dramatic confrontation. He begins to outline his theory, speaking slowly and deliberately. He points to the false testimony of Eloise Renauld, the lies of Martha Daubroy, the double identity of Paul Renauld. He suggests that the murder was not committed by a stranger at all, but by someone within the circle of family and friends, someone who knew the truth of Renaud's past. The household listens in stunned silence. Eloise Renauld sobs quietly, Jack clenches his fists, Marthe stares defiantly, and Madame Daubrow trembles, her face pale as death. Poirot's voice grows sharper. The crime at Merlinville is no simple affair. It is a story of love and hate, of betrayal long concealed, and of a murderer who believed the past could be buried as easily as a body in the sand. The revelation hangs in the air, and Hastings feels the weight of it pressing on his chest. Somewhere among them, the murderer sits, their mask about to be torn away. Poirot pauses, looking from face to face, then declares, "But the hour is not yet ripe. A final proof is needed." Until then, the murderer remains hidden, but not for long. And with that, the gathering disperses in unease, each person retreating to their thoughts, their fears, and their secrets. Hastings, torn between his loyalty to Poirot, his pity for Jack, and his yearning for Cinderella, feels the tension mounting toward a climax that cannot be delayed much longer. The days that follow are heavy with tension. Inspector Giraud struts confidently, convinced Jack Renauld is the culprit, while Poirot continues to wait with infuriating calm. Hastings, torn between frustration and admiration, watches his friend with growing impatience. Hastings's thoughts wander often to his mysterious Cinderella, who remains elusive, her connection to the case still uncertain. Poirot spends hours alone, arranging scraps of evidence on a table, fragments of letters, maps of the villa, sketches of footprints, timelines of movements. To Hastings it seems nothing, but Poirot smiles to himself. "It is all here, mon ami. The truth lies in these small details. The rest is only shadows." At last, Poirot summons everyone to the drawing room of the Villa Geneviève. The atmosphere is tense, each person keenly aware that the truth is about to be laid bare. Eloise Renauld sits pale and trembling. Jack is grim and desperate, Marthe Daubrow calm but watchful, and her mother with eyes fixed on Poirot like a trapped animal. Inspector Giraud lounges smugly, certain Poirot will make a fool of himself. Poirot begins his explanation quietly, as though lecturing a class. He tells them that Paul Renauld was in truth Georges Queneau, the fugitive from the Baroldi case in Paris years before. He had remade himself, amassed wealth in South America, and settled in Merlinville under a new identity. But Madame Baroldi, now Madame Daubroy, resurfaced in his life. She had not forgotten their shared past, and she came to him, demanding money and favor for her daughter Marthe. Paul Renauld, desperate to free himself from her hold, planned to confess the truth to his wife Eloise and start afresh. He wrote to Poirot in a panic, knowing only the great detective could help. But Madame Daubroy was equally desperate. She saw her power slipping away and her daughter's prospects in danger. In a frenzy of passion and greed, she decided Renauld must die. Poirot turns his gaze to Madame Daubroy. She trembles but does not speak. He describes how she entered the villa under cover of night, stabbed Paul Renauld in his room, and with Eloise's help staged the illusion of a kidnapping. Eloise, horrified but devoted, had agreed to conceal the truth to protect her husband's reputation, even after death. They dragged the body to the shallow grave near the golf course, staged the bindings and the clumsy concealment, and left clues pointing to strangers. Hastings is astonished. But what of the second body, the woman in the shed? Poirot explains smoothly. This was another deception. The body was not a servant at all, it was Madame Daubrow herself. In her desperation, she had returned to the villa days later, intent on blackmailing once more. But in the struggle that followed, she was stabbed and killed by her own daughter, Marthe. A collective gasp fills the room. Marthe, beautiful and poised, glares at Poirot with cold fury. Poirot explains that Martha's ambition was as fierce as her mother's. She saw Jack Renauld as her path to wealth, but her mother's reckless actions threatened everything. To secure her future, Martha silenced her mother forever, then pretended ignorance. Her love for Jack, Poirot declares, was always tainted with greed. Jack leaps to his feet in horror. Martha, it cannot be true, but Poirot's words are irrefutable. He produces letters, scraps of testimony, and the final proof, a witness who saw Martha near the shed on the night of her mother's death. The trap is complete. Martha's composure shatters. She collapses in tears, her ambition destroyed, her guilt plain to see. Inspector Giraud, humiliated, slinks away, his arrogance punctured. Poirot accepts his defeat with quiet dignity, though Hastings cannot help feeling triumphant for his friend. The case concluded, Poirot reflects with Hastings on the strange affair. It is always the same, mon ami. Love and greed, they are at the heart of so many crimes. And always, it is the little details that betray the murderer. A grave too short, a coat buttoned the wrong way, such things cannot lie. But Hastings's mind is elsewhere. His thoughts dwell on Cinderella, the mysterious young woman who had flitted in and out of the case. At last, he finds her again, not by chance, but through Poirot's subtle guidance. Her real name is Dulcie Duveen, a spirited English actress with a quick wit and a brave heart. She confesses that she had been entangled in the fringes of the Renauld drama, overhearing things and trying to protect those she could, but her role was minor compared to the Daubrays. For Hastings, it is enough. He is captivated by her charm and courage. With Poirot's amused blessing, Hastings declares his love, and Dulcie his Cinderella accepts. It is a sudden, impulsive engagement, but Hastings is overjoyed. Poirot chuckles, wagging a finger. Mon cher Hastings, you are always the romantic. May you be very happy. And so, the affair of Merlinville concludes. Justice is done, though lives are shattered in the process. Paul Renauld's dark past is revealed, Marthe Daubroy's ambition exposed, and Jack is freed from suspicion. Poirot has triumphed once again, proving the supremacy of the little gray cells over rash judgments and blind passion. Yet for Hastings, the memory of the case will forever be entwined with the joy of finding Cinderella, his unexpected bride-to-be. Where Poirot sees crime and deduction, Hastings finds love and destiny. The contrast between them could not be greater, yet their friendship endures, bound by the mysteries they have shared. As they leave France behind, Poirot smiles quietly, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. The case of the lynx, mon ami, it was a tangled web, but at last, the pattern is clear. And with that, the story closes another triumph for Hercule Poirot, another chapter in the adventures that would make his name legendary.